Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about the great axes in Dark Souls 2. One quick little thing before we get started. The Crescent Axe will not be on this list because I don't think it plays like a great axe. In my opinion, it's a little bit closer to a normal axe. And also I covered that axe in the normal axes videos. Anyways, this class of weapons is a little bit difficult to get used to. They are a great class of weapons, so they have good stagger. I think the closest thing you can compare them to are Ultra Greatswords. However, they have a lot of shortcomings that Ultra Greatswords don't have. A lot of them have very similar weight, for example, to Ultra Greatswords, but they have less reach, less poise break on a couple of them, and less counter damage. The damage is about the same as a Greatsword, but it has a lot of other things that kind of make it more difficult to use than the Ultra Greatswords. So a very, very tricky class of weapons. Anyways, we're going to be going through them here, starting off with the Giant Stone Axe. This one, I mean, apart from already being, like I mentioned, on a class of weapons that have a lot of drawbacks, this thing has even more. It upgrades with Petrified Dragon Bone because it's a boss weapon. You can get it from the Soul of the Last Giant. Unfortunately, it has no counter damage. At 50 strength and dex with the Ring of Blades plus 2, it does 603 damage. But it weighs 25 units, which is ridiculous. Let's say you compare this axe to the Greatsword. Because the Greatsword has very good scaling and has better counter damage, it does end up doing more damage than the Giant Stone Axe. It is very, very difficult to justify using this weapon in particular. I mean, it has a little bit more poise break, but it's not really worth it. Most enemies will stagger from these great weapons anyways. However, if you do want it, you can trade the Soul of the Last Giant to Strayed, and that's the way to get this weapon. Moving on to the next one, we are going to take a look at the Bandit Great Axe. This one you can find in the gutter, very close to where you fight the Hate Knight after you climb up a long ladder. It weighs 10 units, has 45 poise break, 110 counter damage, which is about average for great axes, and at 50 strength and dex, it does 489 damage. This weapon is quite short. I mean, a lot of the great axes have very little reach, but this one takes the cake pretty much. I guess one little nifty thing about it is that you can get 45 poise break without a lot of stamina consumption because it only weighs 10 units. But I do notice that the reach advantage of this weapon is not very good. This does go for the majority of these great axes, and the ones that don't will have sweet spots on them. We'll look at that in a second. But yeah, man, I wouldn't really recommend using any of these axes, to be perfectly honest with you. There are some that are decent, but they just don't compete with other weapons out there. So that's all I have to say about this one. Pretty generic. I guess the only real advantage is that it doesn't weigh very much and you can stagger things quite well with it. Next up, let's look at the Lion Great Axe. This one weighs 12 units. It's a little bit bigger than the previous one that we looked at before. Also weighs a little bit more, and it also does a little bit more damage. So you can get it from the enemies that wield it in the Shaded Ruins. It has the average counter damage of 110 and 45 poise break. 12 units at 50 strength and dex with a Ring of Blades, it does 515 damage. So a pretty nifty jump up from the previous one at 489. And it only takes 2 units more to wield this weapon. But yeah, not much more to say. I mean, I thought this weapon would be extremely good because the enemies that use these axes do so much damage that I just thought maybe this thing had something special. It doesn't really necessarily. It's a pretty basic great axe. A little bit more reach than the other one, but that's about it. Compared to Ultra Greatswords, I still think it loses out, unfortunately. Okay, so the Black Dragon Great Axe. You can get this one from the enemies that wield them in the Dragon Shrine. It also weighs 12 units, similar to the other one. But when you upgrade it with Raw, 50 strength and dex, it actually ends up doing a little bit more damage. 515 with the Ring of Blades. If you upgrade it with Raw, that's what my character has it upgraded with. But the statistics are pretty much the same as the previous one. 45 poise break and 110 counter damage. This one obviously doesn't get any scaling past 35 strength, so if you just want to go to 35 strength, this one could potentially be better because you're not wasting stats since it doesn't have any scaling. However, it does take 15 dexterity, which is a little bit above average for these axes. Again, not much more to say. Relatively straightforward. Whether you use this one or the previous one will pretty much just depend on your build and what your character has stats wise. So yeah, if you're a physical character, I recommend infusing it with Raw. Okay, next axe is just called the Great Axe. This one you can buy from Macduff the blacksmith. Upgrades with regular Titanite, and it takes a little bit of a jump up in terms of weight. It weighs 15 units, 50 poise, 110 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex, it does 571. So it actually jumps up a little bit in terms of damage as well as, well, mostly damage compared to its weight. This one I would say has a little bit shorter reach than the previous two, and also the moveset is slightly different. Arguably worse because it does have those downwards attack, which is a little bit, I would say, worse than the previous one that slashes. But yeah, this is one of my favorite axes to use, and I think it actually looks one of the coolest as well. Your character kind of holds it very close to the handle, so he doesn't have a lot of reach with it. Next one is one quite similar to this one. You find it in the Doors of Pharaohs. It weighs 18 units. So of course, it's going to come with more damage. Notable thing about this one, it has 120 durability. This is the Gurm Great Axe. However, this thing is a bit weird because I think it is classified in the game as a normal axe, kind of like the Bandit Axe or the Battle Axe. So one of the stats is a bit weird because it only has 30 poise, which is the average for normal axes. However, this thing has the moveset and stat. I mean, it pretty much just plays as a Great Axe, right? 110 counter damage and a 50 strength and dex with the Ring of Blades. It does 592, so a little bit more damage than the previous one, as well as a little bit more weight. You can find this in the Doors of Pharaohs, and it upgrades with regular Titanite. Pretty much a copy of the previous one. I actually like the look of the other one better. This one looks a little bit cartoony, in my opinion. But yeah, more weight, more damage. That is the trend with a lot of these weapons for sure. And it's strange. I always forget that this weapon has only 30 poise because it doesn't look like it would. Like, why does this thing have the same poise as a battle axe, for example? Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Maybe that was a little bit of a slip up. Maybe that 30 poise is actually not even 30 and it's just a typo in the game. Who knows? Anyways, pretty decent axe. And now let's take a look at the big brother to this one, which is the Gurm Great Axe. You can get it from Gavlan after you spend, I think, 15,000 souls on him, or you can kill one of the Gurms to get it as a drop. This one stands out a little bit more, has very high weight though at 24 units. This one has 140 durability, so even more, and 55 poise, which is above average for even Ultra Greatswords. 110 counter damage, 50 strength and dex, 622. So more damage, more weight, more durability than the previous two. This one has a little bit of a different one-handed moveset. I would argue it's slightly better than the other two that we looked at. It has the side-to-side slashes, easier to use for crowd control, at least with one hand. But it does have a high strength requirement, and even with that, it doesn't even have that much reach. All these axes are very good for backstab. The more damage they do, the more backstab damage they do. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this thing actually backstabs, kind of like a longsword type of weapon, where you have the quick backstab animation where you grab the enemy, like right before you do the backstab. The way you grab the enemy is the fast one. So that's actually a pretty good thing that this weapon has. It doesn't have the slow version. But yeah, huge axe, takes 50 strength, gets an A scaling in strength, and it's not too bad. So the last two axes in this list deviate a little bit in terms of both length and moveset from the previous ones that we've looked at. Let's start off by looking at the Drakekeeper's Great Axe. This kind of reminds me a little bit of club type of weapon in terms of its moveset. Anyways, you get it in the Dragon Eyrie. It's actually in a chest. One of the weapons you don't have to farm for. So it weighs 16 units, has 90 durability, 50 poise break, 110 counter damage, and a 50 strength and dex. It does 592 damage. So pretty much the same damage as the Gurm Axe, but it does have the 50 poise break instead. And a little bit of a different moveset, as well as a little bit more range. And less weight as well. So I guess this one technically makes the Gurm Great Axe useless. So yeah, this one's two-handed moveset is more closely related to Great Hammers. And it has a little bit more reach than a couple of these axes as well. So I guess you can use it for that reason if you want to as well. Yeah, now that I look at it, I guess the Drakekeeper's Great Axe make a lot of these other ones relatively bad. It's just a big upgrade to all these other axes for sure. I still don't think it's really worth using Great Axes in the first place, but you know, it is what it is. This one is at least not horrible. And last, and to some people maybe not least, the Black Knight Great Axe. This one you can get in the Iron Keep in a chest at a pretty high upper level where you fight 3 Alon captains. This weapon does have a sweet spot unfortunately, which makes it a little bit more difficult than the other ones to use. You kind of have to hit with that sweet spot. It's pretty strict as well, kind of like Halberd in a way. In my opinion, that's asking a little bit too much from its user. It already has the disadvantages that comes with, you know, using a Great Axe in the first place. It does have the slightly better moveset, the one that slashes. That's at least good when you one-handed. And when you two-handed, because you usually get a little bit less range, given the fact that this weapon is longer, you actually have more range than the majority of the Great Axes when you actually two-handed. So that's something at least. 20 units, 60 durability, 50 poise break, 110 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex it says it does 734 damage. However, that is split damage, so you will be doing a little bit less to the enemies when you're actually fighting them. It is one of the higher damaging axes in the game. You just have to keep in mind that armor usually has high defenses to fire, and that is what this thing is doing. But yeah, man, in conclusion, these axes, I just can't get past the fact that they have way too many drawbacks. They are a great class of weapons where you can do a lot of backstab damage, or you can do a lot of poise break. Can be pretty useful in the DLCs, for example, but I just don't understand why you would ever use one of these things instead of an Ultra Greatsword. They don't do more damage than the Ultra Greatsword just based. And then on top of that, the majority of Ultra Greatswords have 130 counter damage, which makes it better. A couple of the Ultra Greatswords have stab attacks that you can combine with the Leo Ring, so essentially the Ultra Greatswords you can just use more efficiently than these. They're better for crowd control, and they are better for parries as well. So yeah, that was it. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time where I'll be covering the scythes. Goodbye everyone.